Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first installment of the new to 2016 support webinars. My name is Aaron Leacock. This morning we'll be talking about the new automatic process and create solids in 2016, the status display upgrades in 2016, as well as the save detail settings when detailing your members in Erection Views and submaterial and group members. So we're going to start off by talking about the new automatic process and create solids within modeling. So in 2016, any change you make within modeling gets processed automatically and the solids are generated automatically again. So to kind of show some of this stuff, I'm going to come in here just to my first floor and just show like a move stretch. If I grab the end of this member and use my move stretch, if I confirm it, you see that it processes it and it updates right away. I don't have to hit my process and create solids when I make that change every time. So I can continuously move this. If I want to move it back, it just processes it quick here. So anything with move stretching of a member, changing the section size of a member updates, the connection type of the member updates immediately. You can also, any components, if I add a component to this beam, let's say I add a stiffeners here, it's going to put the stiffeners in there automatically. I don't have to reprocess anything. If I want to change these stiffeners, let's say instead of fixed spacing, I want an even spacing with 7 spaces. It just updates quick there. It doesn't load the process and create solid screen and have to go through all the processing of all the members. Custom members as well are also, everything in the modeling here is updated. So if I were to edit the stair here and change it from a bent pan, let's say instead of schedule 1 I go to schedule 2, which is a bolted grating, it just updates for me right away. It doesn't have to go through the process and create solids after that change. Connections as well can update immediately. If I were to edit this beam and instead of auto standard, let's say I just want it to be a shear tab, it just updates quick and puts the shear tab in there for me. One thing that I want to point out with this process and create solids on the fly, or the automatic process and create solids, is that it does not affect all members marked for processing. You can still grab a section of your model, mark it for processing just like you always have. But if I were to do a move stretch here back on this member, and we'll just move it a little bit here, it processes the members within that area. I turn it back to solids here. You can see that the rest of the model that was marked for processing does not go through processing. So this does not run the process and create solids after every single change. It just automatically processes and regenerates the material of the members that are affected by that change. You can still run a process and create solids like you always could, and it processes all members marked for processing at that time. This is going to help with multi-user environments. If you have 2 people in different areas of the project, they're not stumbling over each other trying to process all the time and locking the member file. This is just going to process the members that are within that area. Another update to 2016 with the automatic processing and the connections is now when a connection option is changed, it takes into account the entire framing situation as well. Prior in 2015 and 7.3, you have the redesign button in 7.3, and in 2015, anytime you make a change, it just always would hit that redesign connection button. The redesign connection only took into account the end of the member that you were changing and the member it's framing to. It never looked at the actual framing condition or the framing situation check that's made with the process and create solids. And this condition is one that would have to be reprocessed multiple times if you didn't know you needed slip critical bolts. So if I were to edit the right end of this member and change it to shear tab, in 2015 it would say that it passes, and I'd have to process it and see that it failed and re-edit it again and see that I would need slip critical bolts. Now in 2016 it takes into account that framing situation and knows that there's that brace there that's going to add the tension to that beam connection. So I know because there's short slots in that shear tab, I need slip critical bolts now, where I can do it all within the same window here and say OK, and it updates that just once instead of having to process that multiple times to figure out why it's failing. Now, you can turn off parts of this automatic process and create solids. The processing of the members happens as soon as you say OK. That part there's nothing to turn that off. That's just going to mark it for processing as soon as you make the change. The regenerating of solids and the create solids routine that does all the piece marking as well can be turned off so that you can process everything at once if you don't want to continuously update the solids and everything after every change. To do this, this is going to be in your user options. So if I go to my options pull down, go to user options, I have two areas where I can set this. I have the site tab, the option down here at the very bottom to automatic process on member edit OK. I can uncheck automatically create solids, and this will not generate the solids after I make a change. And this site option affects all users that are within this default data directory that's installed. So this is the server. Everyone that's pointed to the server as a client will have this option unchecked for them. You can control this on a member by member basis, or excuse me, a user by user basis. Under the modeling tab, you have the option to automatically create solids on member edit OK. So for this specific user, for my login, I can tell it to use the site default, or I can tell it on or off and use a specific setting for my specific user login. So if I uncheck that, and let's say I decide I want to change these components again, this beam stiffener, and I want this back to fixed spacing, you'll see that it turns in the stick. They go through processing, but they're not gone through the creating of solids. So I need to hit my process and create solids at this point for it to go through and regenerate all of the solids and do all the piece marking at that point. You can, under your options pull down in toolbar configuration, if you go to the process command group here at the very bottom, you can put a toggle on your toolbar that will allow you to toggle on or off the automatic creating of solids. So right now it's set to site. If I click on this, it says off, or if I click on it, it says on. So this can overwrite the site information for that automatic generating of solids. All this does is toggle the user option under the modeling tab. So right now this is on. If I set this to off and say OK, you can see that it updates this to off. If I ever want this user to go back to use the site options, I have to go to my user options and change it there. This toggle is just for on or off. So if I leave it off and make a change, it'll work like it always had, like it just did. If I turn it back to on, I can overwrite the site option and have it automatically update for me for this user. So like I said, you can still mark members for processing just like you always could. You just grab a section of them, right-click, mark them for processing. This would be used for if you make a setup change and need to reprocess your model because of a setup change. You would do it this way still, just marking it for processing and reprocessing the entire model. So that's kind of the update with the process on the fly, or the automatic process and create solids, and some of the options you can turn on and off. Now we will do a question and answer at the end of this, so if you have any specific questions with process on the fly or anything like that, there is a questions area in your GoToMeeting window. Go ahead and fill out any questions you have in there. We'll try to address as many as we can at the end of this webinar. Moving on to the new status display. Status display can be accessed just like it always could. From your model pull down, you can go to status display, use your question mark on your keyboard, or the icon down here at the bottom of the toolbar, and it launches your status display. You'll notice that this status display looks considerably different than what it did in 2015 and prior. You still have all the same information in here. So I have my priorities. This is the priority number 1. I can disable that priority. I can add a new priority below it. It adds a priority down below the first one I click this plus on. I have a move up or down in the priority list, and I have a delete where I can delete that priority. So if I wanted to make a change to this, let's make this just aqua, and I hit the add below again, this plus, it's going to add below priority 1, which pushes priority 2 to priority 3. The move up or down, these arrows are for this specific priority, so if I want to move this down, I would use my move down arrow. It becomes priority 2, so I'd have to click the move down here at priority 2 to move it all the way down to priority 3. So when you're moving these around, you basically just have to follow them up the priority list to make sure you're moving the correct one up or down. If you want to add additional conditions, there's the plus sign here to the left of the color tab, or the color drop down, and it'll add additional conditions to this priority. You still have your masking and coloring and your any, all, or none options here, just like you always have. The trash cans here will delete the extra condition, and the trash can here deletes the entire priority. So if I want to get rid of one of the priorities, I can just click the delete, and it gets rid of all the priorities. You can collapse these priorities just by clicking on them, just like anything else in the member edit screens nowadays. You can click on them on the tree here as well, and it'll expand them. If I click on the default status display here, it just turns it off on the right-hand side here, just like your member edit screens do. I can save this configuration by using the disk here in the upper right. This saves this specific configuration. So if I wanted to save this, I could do that, and it'll save it and give it the new name here. I can also load a new configuration. This load window, or this load icon here, will load over top of what the current configuration is. At the bottom of my screen here, I have a load and a save button as well. These work slightly different. So if I click the load button here, I can select multiple configurations. So if I wanted to grab a few configurations that I already have created, you can see that it loads all of these configurations at once. So I have a sequences one, I have one for submitted for approval, received from approval, and these are just really simple single priority status display configurations versus one really complex one showing a bunch of different settings with different colors. When I have a bunch of these set, I can set which one I want active by flipping this little toggle here. When it's flipped to green, that means this one is the active status display. So if I hit apply, it's going to apply the active status display. So if I toggle a different one and hit apply, it's going to apply that status display. You can also, on the tree here, right click and say set active. You can also delete an extra priority here by right clicking on it and saying delete status. It deletes the entire status, not just the priority. You can right click and say collapse all, which just collapses it here in the tree, and just the plus or minus icon here. You can also expand all. If you fold leaves, it collapses all the priorities here for each status display. And you can unfold leaves, which basically reselects them here and expands them all to the right. The save button at the bottom here saves all configurations with the current name that they're called in the list. If I wanted to change the name of one, I'd have to use the save icon here and change just that specific name. If I wanted to save all of them, if I made some changes, I can use the save button here, and it's going to come up and ask me to browse to a folder to save all of these to. By default, it's going to save to the comp status folder of the data directory, but I could create a new folder in here and tell it to save to that one by hitting enter or selecting it and saying OK. When I load, I'll see that I have another webinar folder with all of those saved to it. So you can have a folder of all of the ones that you created to load. Okay, you still have a legend button down here in the lower right. This shows you the current active status display legend. So if I set a different status active and click on legend, it shows that one in the legend window. Okay, so once I say OK to this window, it's going to apply whatever one was set active. I still have my checkbox on my toolbar where I can turn the status display on or off. But the benefit of the new status display is because all of these are loaded, I can simply select them from a list and I can switch between them very quickly without having to browse for a specific one from a file location every time. If I wanted to load additional status displays to this list, I can use the load here and it'll allow me to select additional status displays from anywhere on my computer or anywhere that I have access to. By default, it's going to go to the comp status folder, and it's going to then add them to the list. It also will add them to the status display window. So again, remember, you can just click on the actual status display name and it turns off the visibility here on the right. If you wanted to add a new one to start over from scratch, let's say, you could just load the default and it'll add an additional default here at the bottom that you can then make a change to and save that to a new name. Now, the one feature that we haven't seen yet that was in the old status displays is to show all other materials in gray. So on this main configuration line next to the little set active toggle, there's a little tile that has the colored structure there. If I click on it, it turns everything gray. So if this icon is gray, that is basically set to show all other materials in gray. When it's colored, it's going to show your normal default modeling colors if a status is not applied. So if I can say OK to this, and you can see that all my other colors are in gray now instead of my default modeling colors. So right next to this little fly up window here, this drop down menu, is the browse icon. So just like in 2015 and prior, you can browse right here to grab a status display as well. This browse is different from the load that is within this drop-down menu. When I click the browse and I select a couple status displays here, it clears everything that's currently loaded and only loads what I select. So if I just select those two again, you'll see that my list now only has the two that I just selected. If I browse again, go to my webinar folder here and select those 5, you can see that it only has those 5 selected. At any point, if you want just to clear everything off and just go back to a default, there is still a clear button here, which clears everything and just goes back to the hard-coded default of the failed connection status display. You can always reset the window to what it was when it opened as well, so there's still that reset button there. Okay, so from within the model, another new addition to the status display is a new toolbar icon that you can add in your toolbar configuration under your model command group. You have a legend icon. I can throw this on my toolbar. I'll go ahead and save it quick. And now it's going to load the legend of whatever the current active status display is. So this is the set active display, the sequences here. So you can pop it up right from the modeling here. You don't have to go into status display to pop that information up now. This again only displays the current applied status. If I were to change the status here, this does not update automatically. I'd have to close it and relaunch it here for it to update. If you keep clicking on it, it just keeps generating a window with that information in it. And you can always verify whether or not this is the correct legend for the current status display, as it tells you the name of the status display here in the window. This is 2 submitted for approval. I can compare this to what is set down here. If those don't match, I can simply close this and just relaunch it to whatever's currently set down here. Okay, so then lastly, setting your default status displays. So prior you could only load one at a time, so you just had your default status display that you loaded every time you brought up modeling. Now in your user options, under your configuration files, you'll have your status display criteria. You can define statuses. This window will allow you to select any number of status displays that you want it to load by default. You can select the add button here and navigate and select any number of status displays that you want to load. You can also pick which one that you want it to be set as the active status when SDS2 loads the modeling window. You can also select one or multiple status displays and just delete them all at once. If nothing is in this list, it always just loads the default hard-coded failed connection status display. So if I were to go ahead and close modeling here and relaunch it really quick, you will see that my default status displays that are loaded are the 3 that I had in that list. Okay, lastly is the new Save Detailing settings. So in your options, under your fabricator options, 2015 added the detailing annotation dimensioning defaults window. This was the window where you could set the options every time you detail the member. This would pop up with these options set. So this is similar to that now in 2016, but the benefit is these are saved to each individual detail now. So I can set my defaults here, and when I detail a member, in this window now, I can define individually how I want that member detailed. If I want to grab just one beam, on the right here now there's a button that's called Settings. This is where I will define my annotation and dimensioning options. And this will apply to any member that I have selected at that time that I click the settings button. So for this specific member, if I don't want to use templates, even though my default is using templates, I can uncheck it here and say OK. As soon as I say OK to that, that information is stored to that detail, regardless if I hit cancel this window or OK and actually detail it. That is automatically stored as soon as you say OK to the settings window. If I click on any other one here and go to settings, you'll see that that is still checked on for those members because that's the default detailing options. If I have multiple selected and go to settings, you can see that there can be mixed fields. So this will say that these are not the same between the two. You can always make them match by forcing it one way or the other. You can go back and reset it or hit cancel and it will not make any changes to that window. If I detail this one with my settings set to the not use the templates and this one set to use the templates, when I say OK, I don't get the prompt to change those settings anymore. That has to be done in that selection list now. That way you can set those up and you can just select all in process and they all follow whatever they were set to when they were saved. So if I were to launch my drawing editor here and look at those details, B11 did not use templates. You can adjust the detailing options from within the detail as well. If you bring up your detail data, or your drawing data, excuse me, using your DD on your keyboard, you can see that there's a settings button in here as well. This will allow you to modify the information here. From this point on, if you only want to detail BOM only, you can turn that option on and say OK, and it'll save that information to this specific drawing. So if I close this drawing and go back to detail members, if I look at the settings now for B11, you'll see that detail BOM only is checked on for it. That only affected that one detail because that's the only one that I set it on. My rest of them are still set to my detail with templates. Now if I changed my defaults, let's say I wanted to not use detailing templates now. If I say OK to this and go back and look at my detail members, these two, this B11, if I look at the settings, still is saved to whatever was saved out when I last detailed it, when I last saved those settings, whether it's from this window or from the detail itself. B13, detailed with templates. So because that was detailed and saved to that specific drawing, that is, this does not update when the default changes. Any member that has never had the settings saved or is brand new will follow the detailing settings of not having those templates set. You can select all of these at once and say default in this window, and it will force all of them to match the default settings. By saying OK to this window, it saves this to each drawing. So only new members will follow the default settings from that point on. These are saved out to these specific settings. It doesn't link it back to the default, it just forces it to match whatever's in the default settings. So now that I've saved all of those, if I go and change my setup one last time, now changing your setup is not something you're probably going to do very often for your default detailing, but just to show that if I change this and go back into my detail members list, you'll see that the settings for these do not follow the setup anymore because I saved them all out matching the prior default. But I can select all here, go into settings and tell it to match default again, and reapply this to match the default for all of these this way. Erection views have also been updated. So in my options pull down now under my fabricator options, the erection view detailing options have been revamped. So in this window, I have 3 tabs. I have appearance, annotations, and piece marks. This window has been combined between the detail erection view window and your detail erection view options into one window now. So you have your member style in here. You have options in your annotations like dimension grids above left or below right. This is all set in one window now. And these are the defaults for all of your erection views. So by default, it's going to be in stick. I'm going to be dimensioned above and left when I annotate this erection view. If I open up a specific erection view with my detail erection view, I can select one and go to my settings. And in here, I can customize how this erection view is going to detail. So if I wanted this one specifically detailed in wire, and let's say I want a status display defined for this specific ISO view, I can define my status display. I can load. Let's load that sequences one and say OK. And as soon as I say OK to this, it saves that out to this drawing. Now the one thing that I want to point out here is that the status display that is saved is not linked to that sequences status display that I saved or that I loaded in here. It saves this independently but makes it identical to the status display that I selected. So if I make a change to the sequences status display in my comp status folder, I'd have to come in here and either make the same change again or just reload that sequences status display and have it update the information and then resave it. So if I were to say OK to that and detail it, it's going to take a few seconds here because it's in wire. If I open up my drawing editor again here and look at my erection views, you can see that it detailed it with my status displays turned on. I can go to my drawing data as well and go to settings, and let's say from this point on I never want to annotate this again so it doesn't add any more labels or anything like that to it. I can turn that off and save it so that if this ever gets redetailed, it doesn't re-annotate anything. The benefit of this is that you can customize different types of erection views, like an anchor bolt plan. I could go to settings, I could go to my annotations and tell it to dimension anchor bolt layout. I can set specifically on this one whether I wanted an absolute elevation or a reference elevation, the prefix specifically for this view. I can say OK to this, and if I were to select both of these at once, they both detail based on what was saved to those erection views. I don't have to run this multiple times now for different erection view settings every time I detail erection views. So lastly, if you were paying attention and looked in my settings here, you'll see that in the member style there is no manually. If I detail erection view manually, I will have to use a special process. So under my process pull down, we now have detail erection views manually. This is also on your main menu, detail erection views manually. When I select this, I can pick which erection view that I want to be detailing manually and go to settings. It loads everything that was already saved with that erection view. It's still the exact same setup options, same status display and everything. The only thing that it ignores is the member style. At this point, it's going to be manually, so it ignores whatever style was set here for that erection view. When I say OK and OK to detail this, it comes up with it should come up if I didn't have it open. it details my erection view again. Let me make sure I got the manually option here, so that I can grab a section of them and say I want those in stick and I want these in solid. I can then save it, and it'll save that erection view for me with those options. If I detail erection views again and look at the ISO view, you'll see that it still has wire here. So if this gets redetailed using the normal erection view detailing, it will go back to whatever this member style is for that case. Saving over erection views, as long as you save over the same name, will not affect anything. It'll still be linked to the same erection view statuses or the settings. If you save it as a new name, obviously it'll have new settings applied to it. So that is the webinar for this morning. With the automatic process and create solids, the status display updates, and the save detail settings. If you have any questions,